Hello and welcome to today's episode of Business Growth Academy. I'm Jen Richardson and today I want to talk to you about one of the biggest misunderstandings I see in small businesses, and that is the idea that if revenue is coming in, then everything must be okay. So a lot of business owners will look at turnover or what income is coming in and look at how busy they are. Look at how much work's coming through the door, and then they tell themselves that things like, we'll be fine, we just need more work, or we just need to keep pushing. But that's not always true, because you can have really good revenue or income and still have a business that is under real financial pressure. You can be flat out and still not have enough left over for you as the business owner. You can be invoicing plenty of money and still feel stressed every time bills come in. You can also be winning work and still not actually building a stronger business or even a more profitable business. That's where margins matter. Now, if we haven't met before, I'm Jen Richardson. I'm the founder of 123 Financial Group and Business Growth Academy. And we work with small business owners, especially tradies and service-based businesses who are hardworking, bringing in money, but still feeling pressure around cash flow, profit, tax, and understanding what their numbers are really saying to them. And this is one of the conversations I think that more business owners really do need to hear, because right now, small business owners are still dealing with rising input costs and squeezed margins. So ASB FEO, which is Australian Small Business and Family Entrepreneurs Association, it's always a really long term that I seem to forget. So the latest report says exactly that, and that's why so many business owners are feeling like they're working harder without actually seeing more reward. So today I want to talk about what margins actually tell you, why they matter so much, and why revenue on its own can be misleading, and what to look at if you want to know whether your business is actually working for you. So I want you to stay with me, because this one is one of the shifts that can completely change the way you look at your business. So I've had clients over the years that have had really high revenue or turnover, and yet they're actually not making a profit. Conversely, I've had clients that have not had huge revenue, but they're making a really good profit. And so it all comes down to margin. So revenue is the number that everyone and every small business owner looks at first. And that's because it's the top of the profit and loss statement. It's the one that shows the money coming in. And we've been trained over the years that if you have really good revenue, that you should be okay. But it's not a number that tells the full story. Yes, it's great. And if I had a choice between a business that earned 200,000 and one that earned 2 million, the revenue should be good. The profit margin, though, is what will tell you what is left to cover costs. So a business can look successful from the outside and still be quietly under pressure. And that's where your costs come in. So being busy, of course, when I'm talking to clients, they'll say, we're flat out, business must be good. And then we look at their financials and they're not actually making any more money than they were the year before. And what busyness does is it hides a margin problem for a long time, because when we're busy, we don't look at any of our numbers. We just go, it must be good because money's coming in. And there's been lots and lots of businesses that, they're really big businesses, and we hear it all the time, that just go under. And there's been multinational businesses that have done that. There's been national businesses. So we're not just talking family businesses here or small businesses that we look after. This is across the board, and everybody thinks that by getting more sales or increasing their revenue, that it will create more money in the business. And if we don't keep on top of our costs, then it doesn't matter how much money you make. If your margins or your costs aren't being decreased, then you're actually creating more work for yourself. So if the work is not leaving enough behind, so you collect your revenue in and then you pay out what we call your cost of goods sold. So that's the costs of actually producing what it is that you sell. If that's not enough to cover your fixed costs, so things like your rent, your phone lines, your admin staff, your insurances and things, then it doesn't matter what your revenue is, because the costs are eating up too much of the income to leave it for the expenses to be covered. So revenue tells you how much work you're doing, whereas your margin tells you how much you've got left and what your true worth is. So margins are actually far more important than the revenue. So the ASB FEO is still reporting rising costs and squeezed margins for small businesses. So this is not just a theory conversation. It's a very real issue that is very real in the current environment. And of course, with the war and everything that's going on, our costs are going up, our fuel's going up. So what that's going to show is that even if you've got a really good margin left over, so remember the margin is what is left after you pay the direct cost for producing whatever it is that you sell. If those margins are shrinking and your costs are going up, your profit is going to decrease fairly quickly. So here's the reality that I want every small business owner to understand. A lot of owners use turnover as their main measure of success. So we see that real puff out of our chests of, my revenue doubled in the last 12 months. And again, it's a good figure, don't get me wrong, and it is one of the what we call KPIs, so key performance indicators, that we would look at with a small business, but it's not the biggest and most important one. So, it's sales is vanity. We've heard that before. And everybody loves to tell you what their turnover is. Nobody looks and promotes what their margin is and things like that. So you can feel reassured that you're busy, but busyness doesn't necessarily mean progress with your business. And it is important, because revenue is only the top line. And it doesn't matter what your revenue is. If your expenses are only matching your revenue, you're not making any money. And that will be whether your revenue is 250,000 or 250 million. So, revenue is what's coming in, but what's important is what's gone out and what's left. So it is a good indicator, and it is one of the KPIs we look at, but it is not the most important one. Because, revenue says nothing about what the direct costs are of getting that income. It doesn't look at your wages. It doesn't look at your overheads. It doesn't look at your fuel costs, which are going up ridiculously. It doesn't look at your wages. Now, cost of living is increasing. Before long, we're going to have pressure as employers that our wages are going to have to go up, because all of our employees, whether that be direct employees or contractors, their cost of living is going up. So they're going to want to increase their income so that they can still afford to live. So as employers, we need to be aware that not only have we got all of our costs of, getting everything in for our business, but we're going to end up with pressure from our employees and our contractors to increase their income, which will increase our expenses. So if costs have gone up and your pricing has not kept up with that, then revenue can look healthy while the business actually just gets weaker and weaker underneath. So this is why owners can feel confused. So because a business looks busy, but it doesn't necessarily feel good. So one of the things that we hear a lot of our business owners saying is that they just didn't realise that they had a margin problem, because they're looking at the wrong numbers. Because what comes into your bank account is a really easy number to keep on top of. What is going out in invoicing. So, if you invoice, let's say every Friday, and you go, yep, my invoicing was up on last week, or it was up on this time last year, or whatever it was up on, isn't really an issue. It's the fact that you look at it and go, my invoicing has gone up, I must be okay. And it's not necessarily the case. And so, when we talk to our small businesses, we say, definitely look at your revenue, because it is a key factor. but you need to have a look at what your gross profit margin is, and then you need to look at what your other expenses are so that you can work out what your net profit looks like. Sorry, what your actual profit looks like. So your net profit is revenue less your cost of goods sold. That's your net profit. And then your actual profit is after all those, what are fixed costs. So the difference is fixed costs are those that would happen whether you generate $1 of revenue or not. So as I said, things like your rent, your admin staff, your insurances, your telephones and internets and things like that. Your margin expenses, so the expenses that contribute to your working out what your margin is, are the costs for producing the goods. So the direct labour, the materials that come in to produce that, and anything that is directly associated with the production of the goods. So what we always look at is your revenue, then we look at your gross profit margin, and then we look at your your profit to work out what you have actually made. So they're 3 KPIs that every business owner should look at. Whereas what we find is every business owner just looks at revenue. So Xero's latest small business data showed that sales growth has rose 6.7% year on year when they looked at it in the December 25 quarter, which sounds positive on the surface, but at the same time, small businesses are still dealing with cost pressure, which is exactly why your sales growth on its own does not tell you enough. Now, across Australia, there are just over 2.7 million businesses actively trading, and that's as at 30th of June last year, so 2025, with 97.3% of those businesses being small businesses. So this is a conversation that matters to a huge number of business owners. So if you're one of those 97.3% business owners and you're just looking at your revenue, reach out to me and I'll give you the 3 KPIs that you should be looking at. So why does this happen? So why are business owners only looking at revenue and not all those other KPIs that we should be looking at? And it's because we've always been taught to chase revenue. You know, the first thing that we always say to a business owner when you're talking to them is, what's your revenue? What income did you generate last year? We do everything. You know, our quotes are based on revenue. Our sales are there. It's always something that is easy to look at. And there's a lot of noise in the business saying, you know, sell more, market more, and get more work and you'll be fine. But most of the people that are saying that are not educated in how to look after a business. And if I said to 95% of business owners, do you know what your margin is? Firstly, most of them would probably look at me and say, I actually don't even know what a margin is, let alone how to work it out and to know what it is from my point of view. And working that out does take a little bit of time if you haven't got your financials set up correctly. So it's important when you do your financial statements that you do have, you know, your revenue and then you have your cost of goods sold, which will give you your profit margin. And so if you've got your financials set up to do that, you should be in the habit of checking it at least monthly. You know, as a business owner myself, I always look at mine weekly. It's just a habit I've got into. So I do a lot of things on a Monday morning. My first job Monday morning is to look at what we spent the last week and reimburse credit cards. My second job is to look at what's in the bank account, what's coming out in the next week. And then I always look at what my margin looked like for the last week. And then I do at the end of the month as well. And quarterly when I hit the end of each quarter. And I do that because I can make quick decisions on the run then, that I'm not, having 3 months or even 12 months, or in some of my business clients' situation, it's nearly 2 years before they look at it because, you know, they don't look at it. And so they run a financial year from July to June, and then we do their financial statements, which might be, you know, March, April. That July from the previous financial year is almost 2 years ago. So if you've got a margin problem or you don't have cost control and you're just working on revenue, looking at something almost 2 years later means you have lost a lot of money or you've lost an opportunity to be better at your business. So we find when we work with small business owners, if we show you how to get these reports and you do your accounting on a regular basis, either yourself or through a bookkeeper, then you've got those figures there that you can make quick, informed decisions and not gut decisions. And gut decisions is always based on how busy you are or how much revenue you're bringing up. And of course, costs creep up quietly. You know, materials, your labour, your fuel, your software, your insurance, your rent, your subcontractors, you know, everything. And, you know, because they're just getting paid all the time, you don't take any notice. And it's not until you look back and then go, I just had no idea that the materials had gone up that much. And that's one of the key things to having that real-time data there with your regular processing. And with our bookkeeping division here, that's why we process everything for our clients weekly instead of monthly or quarterly, which most bookkeeping businesses do. And that's because as an accountant, I want any of our bookkeeping clients and my clients to have that information at hand as it's happening. You know, it's a bit like the fuel tank in your car, isn't it? You have the fuel gauge on your dashboard so that you can keep an eye on how much fuel you've got left. So if you're driving, you know, you're going to go to Sydney tomorrow and you've only got less than a quarter of a tank of fuel in your car, you know you need to fill up to get to Sydney and back. But nobody does that with their business. And so that's where you need to keep up with your costs. So it's really important. And of course, as your costs are going up, we find that pricing often lags behind because a lot of business owners that we talk to are afraid of putting their pricing up because we will quite often take the persona of our customer and just say, oh, everything's going up for them. They're not going to cope. They'll stop using us. They won't do this and they won't do that. The reality is, if you are not increasing your pricing when your costs are going up, you have inadvertently become an investor in your customer's business because you're helping to support them. And whether that's a business or their own personal life, you have supported them by you taking on the extra costs. So, you know, if I'm going to invest in somebody else's business or somebody else's lifestyle, I want something out of it. I don't want to be there as that unofficial supporter. And so it's really important that your business is not just busy, but making sure that it's busy while it's increasing its profit, or at least maintaining the profit that you have. And so what happens is we think we're busy, so we're going okay, the costs are going up. And if your costs are going up, your profit margin is coming down. And then if those fixed costs are going up, then your profit is actually coming down significantly because it's coming down firstly in the cost of your product that you're selling and then coming down again when we get to all your fixed costs. And so what that means is that you're working harder but making less money. Now, I don't know anybody that wants to work harder and make less money. The idea of being in business is to give you freedom. And we always talk about the three freedoms. There's financial, there's mind, and there's time. So the financial freedom is where what we're talking about here, where you are not covering your costs as much as you used to, so your profit is shrinking, which means you're working harder. And that probably means then that you don't have time freedom because you're working longer hours to try and make the same amount of money. And that's how owners end up exhausted. They end up confused about why their business isn't doing what they should be doing, and they're still not seeing the financial reward they expected when they went into business. So the natural thing that we hear most people say is that more work only keeps up with the work is profitable enough. Otherwise, you're leaving something behind. So the ASB FEO's February 2026 poll said that small business confidence edged up only 0.01% over the 3 months to February 26. So yes, there's resilience there, but it also tells you that businesses are still operating pretty carefully and there's not enough breathing room for them. And Xero also found that employing small businesses lost an average of $15,000 over the last financial year due to late payments, which is another reason that your margins matter so much, because when cash comes in late, those thinner margins get actually exposed a lot faster. So I guess what we need to talk about now is margins. So margin tells you what is left over after the costs of delivering the work. So I said earlier that the cost to deliver your product is what we call the cost of goods sold. So it's your revenue less your cost of goods sold is a dollar figure, and that is your profit margin. And so that is what you have left over to pay the operating costs of your business. And a margin shows whether there's work is creating enough room to carry the overheads. So that's to pay things like your tax, to generate profit for you as the business owner, to support you and your lifestyle, to pay all those costs of actually operating a business. And those costs don't care whether you make more money or less money, they're still there. And of course, those costs are increasing. I mean, I don't know about anybody else's insurance, but every business that I've worked with, and certainly my business, I don't know about anybody else's business, but the businesses that I've worked with, and my own business, of course, my insurance has gone up ridiculously over the last probably 5 years. But what I do as a business owner is I know that's happening because I keep on top of my costs. And so what I do is I never just automatically renew any insurance product, or I actually don't automatically renew anything. So before any insurance is paid, I shop around to see if I can get a better price. I have a broker, and then I've got a different broker for my business as well, because I found a broker that gives a much better pricing for insurance in accountancy. So they pretty much just look after accountants. So I look at all of those costs, and I do that because I'm over all my costs in my business. And so when your margins are pushed, and you know we're all getting pushed at the moment, it helps you compare which jobs are profitable and which jobs aren't. So quite often the jobs that we're doing and doing a lot of can mean that they've got a smaller profit margin than the jobs that we don't do quite so much of, that has a better profit margin. And so, you know, you'll talk to particularly people in the trades, and let's say you're a plumber, and you do household, just putting in, you know, new bathrooms, new kitchens and those sorts of things. Your profit margin is probably a lot less than the profit margin of a builder that does commercial work, because you know, there's a greater room to increase your pricing when you're looking at commercial work. But if you're a plumber doing domestic work, you might look at doing new bathrooms or kitchens and compare that to doing, you know, installing water tanks in residential complexes and things. So looking at which parts or what services you provide is really important, as well as looking at your business as a whole, because you want to make sure that you're trying to do more of the work that gives you a greater profit margin than doing more of the work that gives you a less profit margin. So if you can do less work and make the same amount of money, it's far better off than working your butt off and making less money. So it's also important with your margins, because a business can hide the weaknesses behind that. You know, you're flat out, but you're not actually looking whether you're actually making money on that type of work. And, you know, in the accounting world, you know, I always say that I started my business because I felt that small business owners weren't getting the support and help that they were getting. I was a manager at a national accounting firm, and they really didn't want to look after small businesses or individual taxpayers. So when I started my business, I saw that as a gap. Now, do I have the profit margin that the big four have? Absolutely, I don't. Do I do work that I love? Absolutely, I do. But I know what my profit margins is. I know what jobs I don't want to accept. And when a new client comes to me, I make a decision whether the amount of work I've got to do and what I can charge them is worth it to my business, because I don't want my staff and myself working flat out and we actually don't make any money. So it's an important thing that you understand your margin so that you can work out which jobs make you the most money, which jobs you want to go pushing to get more of, and which jobs you want to do less of because they don't make you enough money. So without that margin awareness, decisions are often based on emotion or a gut feeling, or on urgency instead of the facts. So margin is one of the clearest ways to tell whether your business is actually working or whether you're just working in your business. And the direct squeeze on your margin is still a live issue for small businesses. As I said, every business is going through increased expenses. So if your margin is being squeezed and you don't know it, the business can look active while becoming actually more fragile underneath. So you're taking the risk. So let's talk about what thin margins look like in real life. So the business is busy, but there's never much cash left. It can be that you know you've got bills coming up, but you're wondering where you're going to find it. So the owners feel relief when invoices finally get out and the stress when the bills arrive. So with that, I'm talking about, it might be that you invoice every Friday and there was a lot of work done, but it's not at a point that you can invoice it yet. And so you start to feel stressed because you're looking at what bills are going to come out of your bank account next week. And then all of a sudden a job finishes, so you quickly invoice it so that you can get the money in. And we see this particularly in the building industry, because in the building industry, we're paying for materials that we're putting into whatever it is that we're working on, whether that be a commercial construction site or whether it's a domestic construction site, or even if you're making furniture, you're buying on all your materials. But you've got to get to a point before you can bill that customer. And if you've got to pay your bills and the income hasn't come in, that can create some real stress. Now, that's okay if you know your profit margins are good, because the profit margin from the last job should carry you over till these ones come in. But if your profit margin's not good and your materials have gone up but you haven't requoted your jobs because they couldn't, then you're creating financial stress because your gross profit margin is decreasing. Another thing that you can look at is that if revenue is up but your wages and your direct costs have gone up, so you haven't accounted for that, which means again it's eating into what you've got left over to pay the bill. The other thing that we find when we're talking to small business owners is that they will feel like they're working harder than ever, but they're actually not getting ahead. So, we can talk to some of our clients and they'll say to us, Jen, I'm flat out, but it's not showing in my bank account, or I'm flat out and people still owe me money, or I just don't know where the money's going. So they're the common things that we hear from people. Or the other one we hear is, I'm just exhausted. And, I'll be right when I finish this job. Or, there's so many ways that manifests, or how we hear it. So one slow month or one late payer, or if an unexpected cost comes up, and that can cause immediate pressure, that's when you know that you've got margins issues. So it's not a revenue issue. It's that trigger that, holy hell, how am I going to get through next month when I haven't got as much this month? Or it can even be where people go, I'm quoting, but I'm not winning, so I'm going to decrease my quotes so I get more jobs. That's a margin issue, and it means that, you've got to stop and look at where you're spending your money and what you're doing with your money. So the other thing is when a business starts relying on more and more work to solve a problem, because the margins are not actually creating enough safety net. And that's where I was saying that people will quite often say, I'm quoting heaps of jobs, but I'm not actually winning the quote, so I must be too high, so I'll discount. And we always say to business, in tough times, you need to increase your pricing, not decrease your pricing. And, we've seen in the last 12 months those, I don't even know which one it was now, but one of those discount stores, I call them the dollar shops, one of those went under. So that just shows you that, just because you're cheap doesn't mean you're going to make more money. So this is where business can look fine from the outside, but on the inside it can actually feel really, heavy, or like it's dragging you down, or it's just sucking every living life out of you. So Xero's latest late payment data showed that Australian small businesses are still being paid on average 6.6 days late. Now, that may not seem huge, but when margins are already thin, even a short delay can create stress very quickly. And as I said earlier in this podcast, you didn't go into business to support somebody else's business or lifestyle. So what I want you to do is stop asking only this, how much revenue did we do? But what I want you to start looking at is, how much of that revenue did we actually keep? So the shift from chasing volume to understanding the quality of your revenue is so important, because not all work is good work. And that was where I was saying earlier that looking at the margins that you've got on each job is what will give you the jobs that you need to chase, or the more work that you want. And that then gives you a key to how you market yourself, because understanding the jobs that actually make more money is the way that you will then market and present yourself, so that the work that you get is more of the ideal work. So some jobs, some clients, and some services create activity, but they actually don't create a return. And I had this discussion with one of my clients. He was a butcher, or is a butcher, and he was chasing the home delivery service. And we said to him, by the time you deliver, you've got a butcher out delivering, you've got the cost of the van, and they're refrigerated, they've got to go through all the health checks and everything. You're delivering food that you're not making a lot of money out, because there's not a huge profit margin on meat. But then he had contracts for the raffles, that happen inside clubs and pubs and everything. And that was a really good margin for him. So we said to him, you've got to stop the home delivery stuff. People want your meat. They come to you for the quality and the service that you give them. They will come to your shop. If somebody's going to deliver food to my house free of charge, I'm getting it delivered because it's convenient for me. It's not convenient for the company that I'm buying it from. And we said to him, start chasing more and more of the raffles and the things through clubs and sporting associations and things like that, because that's where you've got the really good margins. Now, did he take our advice? Sort of. But it was a hard thing for him to walk away from the home delivery service, because in his mind, he said to me, is my revenue though, it's making up 20% of my revenue. I can't let that go. But what he wasn't looking at was the small profit margin that he would have been losing. So after he bought the meat in, the butchers, broke up the carcasses and got it all ready and everything, there's not a huge profit margin there left to cover the costs. Whereas if he could take the butchers and his employees that were doing this home delivery meat and use that to make the packs to go out to the raffles, he actually had a greater profit margin. And so whilst his revenue might not have been or looked as good, his profit margin was far better. So that same job is just in a different delivery service was much better for him. So a smaller amount of better margin work can actually create a healthier business than a larger amount of low margin work. And as I said, those dollar shops proved it last year. One of the big ones, I can't remember what it was called, but they went under. So this is where clarity changes everything. So I would rather see a business doing the right work at the right margin than doing more work that keeps them just exhausted and not actually making any more money. So here's some practical steps that I want you to go and follow and look at in your business. Now, not next week, not when things get quieter, but now. So I want you to look at your gross profit margin per job, per service, or per product line. So yes, there's a little bit of work in it, but if you're going to make money, you've got to be prepared to do the work. So I want you to review whether your pricing still reflects your current costs. So if your costs of being in business has increased, has your pricing increased to reflect those additional costs that you've got to do as a business owner? So I want you to also identify the work that keeps you busy but does not leave enough behind to cover your costs. So what I said earlier, busyness in a business doesn't mean you make more money. So identify which of those, services or contracts or the work that you're doing or the delivery of whatever the product is, look at which ones are keeping you busy but not making the most money. So as I said, if you can make the same amount of money and work only 80%, isn't that better? Because as a business owner, that gives you more freedom to do the things that you want, more freedom with your family, more freedom to actually sleep. And so that is what we want for you as a business owner. So I also want you to look back at your costs over the last 12 months. So look at your cost creep in the things in your wages, your materials, your fuels, your subcontractors, your insurance. And I want you to look at if you can get anything better. I mean, obviously wages, materials and subcontractors are difficult, but that doesn't mean that you've still got to do all of it. So look at your productivity from your subcontractors and your wages. Is there a way you can make your staff more productive? AI is a great tool that we're finding helps us in our business, because what used to take me a couple of hours to write a newsletter to my staff now only takes me about half an hour. I come up with the ideas, I put it into AI, and then I take what AI gives me and personalize it for my clients and myself. I don't take everything straight out of AI, but it's, words aren't my greatest thing. I'm good at talking, I'm good at numbers, but get me to write something and I struggle. So it was always difficult for me. So what can you use? You can get AI bots on your website that will answer a lot of your questions so that your staff aren't talking to as many customers, that are just making I call them tire kicking questions. So have a look and see if you can do that. Is there a way of maybe outsourcing some of your work where you don't have the downtime if you don't have it? So look at how you can get on top of your materials, your wages, your subcontractors, and all the other costs of being in business. I want you to stop assuming that more sales will fix your business, because no amount of sales will fix a weak margin. You need to do that work to find out what your costs are and what your margin is, so that you can make informed decisions. It's also, I want you to start building a regular reporting system to yourself as a business owner. So if you've got a bookkeeper, get them to give you your reports more regularly. As I said, our bookkeeping division, we do all of this weekly for our clients. We don't do it monthly and quarterly like a lot of other bookkeeping businesses do, and we do that because we want our clients to have that information on a more regular basis. So if you need help with your bookkeeping, reach out to us. We're certainly no more expensive than any other bookkeeping business. And if that's a cost that can get you to look at your margins and increase your pricing and look at which businesses or business services you should be providing, then it's not actually a cost, it's actually helping you grow. So I want you to pick a day, whether it's at the end of the week, the start of the week, and I want you to have a look at what last week looked like, how much money you've got in the bank account, what's coming up in the next week, who hasn't paid you that is now late and needs to be reminded and asked to get that money into you. So I want you to use your margin as a guide for your pricing decisions, so your staffing decisions, and of course your growth decisions. And if the numbers are starting to show that you're under pressure, respond early rather than waiting until your cash flow gets tight, because you don't know how to do that if you're not looking at your figures on a regular basis. So if you don't know what your margins are, you're making decisions with only part of the picture. So here's something to remember. As I said, the small businesses in Australia employ more than 5 million people. 97.7% of our workforce is employed through small businesses. So we use, as I've said in last time's podcast, we use what is called the profit engine. So we look at clarity, control and growth, and every business should know how to do that. So you can look at the clarity is around finding out what your costs are, what your revenue is, what your margins are. So that gives you the clarity. The control you have will allow you to make better decisions around your pricing, around which jobs to take, whether you can grow before you're under cash flow pressure. So the control is there for you as a business owner. And of course, if you don't know those, you aren't going to have healthy growth, because healthy growth comes from profitable work, not just more work. So margins is one of the strongest indicators of whether growth is helping or hurting. So if your margins are weak, growth can actually create more chaos instead of more freedom for you as a business owner. And this is exactly why margins matter so much. So inside the profit engine is where we look at the clarity that comes from margins so that growth can happen as quickly or as slowly as you want it to be. So if you've been listening to this podcast and realizing that maybe you have been watching your revenue instead of your profit margin, what I want you to understand is you're definitely not alone, because most business owners will do that, because revenue is an obvious number. You know, when you send your invoicing out at the end of the week or the month, you know what you've generated. When you're starting to look at your margins, it does take a little bit more work, but you didn't go into business to find the easy way. And if you want the rewards that come with business, you do have to do a little bit of work. And of course, everyone talks about revenue. My revenue doubled last year, my revenue slowed, my revenue's this, my revenue's that. Nobody starts talking margins. And I'm not telling you that you need to be talking margins to anybody else except for yourself and your business advisors, but it is something that will give you the truth of your business quicker than anything else. So no one talks about margins because nobody really wants to know the truth. So if your business is feeling busy but still feels tight, or it's more stressful than it used to be or what you want it to be, then this is one of the first places that I want you to look at is your margins. And of course, at 123 Financial Group, we work with small business owners, and that's especially those in the trades businesses and service businesses. And one of the first things that we work with them is to help them understand their numbers, improve their cash flow, make stronger decisions around profit, pricing, and growth. And through my podcast here at Business Growth Academy, we support business owners who want more guidance, more confidence in their business, and more control in the way they run the business. So if you've been listening to this and thinking, I actually don't know what my profit margins is, or I know we're busy, but I'm not sure if the work is paying me enough money, then this is a really good reason to start looking deeper. Because, you know, once you understand your margins, you will start making very different decisions, and decisions from a point of understanding. And of course, if you know another business owner that needs to hear this, send them over and get them to listen to this podcast episode, because this is one of the conversations that can really change the way someone sees their business. And of course, if this has rung true with you, or you want to have more help with your small business, I'd love if you would like or subscribe or follow me on any of our socials, or come join me over on our YouTube channel, where I give you lots of help and support. Now, our podcast hits every week. Our YouTube channel, we put a new video up every week. So there's lots of support there for you if you need it. Or of course, reach out to me here at 123 Financial Group, and I would love to have a chat how I can help you and your small business give you the life that you went into business for. And that's, of course, the three freedoms of freedom of time, money, and peace of mind.